Welcome back for another sector interview. I'm Andreas Senie, host of the CRECo.ai Roundtable and founder of the CRE collaborative platform. Joining me today is none other than Dr. Darren Hayes, a leading expert in the field of digital forensics and cybersecurity, a good friend and advisor, longtime host to the show. Darren, welcome. Looking forward to diving deep. For those of you tuning in for the first time, and I hope it's not your first time, Darren is one of the top 10 computer forensic professors by Forensics College. He's commonly appears on MSNBC, CNN, Fox, Wall Street, everything, everywhere. But why does that all happen? Well, I think it has something to do with the fact that it's computer forensics, right? What is computer forensics? Let's start there, Darren. Welcome to the show.
First of all, great to be here. Thank you, Andreas. Really appreciate the invitation. So let's talk about computer forensics. So the forensics part of it means to make something admissible for court. It is a science, so we have to follow certain protocols. And it's different from computer security because we come in after something has gone wrong. So computer security is being proactive, protecting systems, and computer forensic examiners come in and usually after a data breach or something has gone wrong, it can come into what's called e-discovery, electronic discovery, where maybe there's civil litigation between two sides, or the SEC has asked a publicly traded company for documentation, and a forensic examiner runs certain searches for a company. But much of what we do, again, relates to often network breaches, what happened, who was responsible, how to mitigate that risk, and treat everything as if what we're examining will one day end up in court and lead to a prosecution.
So this is basically the birthplace of CODEDETECTIVES. You are the detective. So you're CEO of CODEDETECTIVES. This is what you do privately. You go out, you work with companies, and you examine all of their hardware. You did so for me, worked with me at one point in the past. We're not going to talk about when, where, or what, given the environment. But it's a crazy world we live in. Every day we talk about ransomware, or we hear about ransomware, or Bitcoin, or all of these things happening. Victims, a dark web full of our information. And you join us every month on our show, the CRECo Roundtable, first Thursday of every month, where we talk commercial real estate technology, brokerage, government policy. And you don't get a lot of time when you probably have the most to say, because cybersecurity, forensic analysis, our digital selves we live, exist, and breathe online. If I was offline for a day, I don't know what I would do. I know what I would do, but I have a recovery plan because I've worked with you and so forth. But what is the biggest thing you talk about on the show being ransomware? What does that mean to the everyday person? You hear about it. 70% of households have been hacked. Is that ransomware, or what does that really mean for everybody in the common day?
Yes. Sure. So ransomware attacks have been on the increase year over year. And a number of years ago, this is not a recent report, by the FBI stated that there's 4,000 ransomware attacks on a daily basis. So first of all, who's responsible? Well, Russia is a big proponent of ransomware. It's a great way of raising cash because and we'll talk about what that ransomware attack is. But with so many sanctions, Bitcoin is that intermediary cryptocurrency that can be easily exchanged for dollars or euros or whatever anybody needs. We've seen ransomware used by hackers to make money, but also terrorism. There's links there. We've seen recently a hacker group that was arrested, or a person perpetrating ransomware attacks. And we also have people in the United States who are initiating ransomware attacks. Many of these attacks often, relate to political conflict. So there's been this political conflict that's been going on with Ukraine for many, many years. Definitely predates the Biden administration, and it was definitely very active in the Trump administration, where we had a number of different cyber attacks, which include ransomware. And some of this malware just goes across the internet, that proliferates and ends up in Western Europe, in the United States, and across the globe. So ransomware is basically malware that infects your network and encrypts all your files. You get this really devastating message saying everything is locked down on your computer. You need to pay a ransom. And this ransom is generally in cryptocurrency, usually in Bitcoin, and it's usually on a per host basis. And then if you don't pay the ransom within, say, 24 hours, that ransom continually increases.
Well, and even if you do pay the ransom, as I understand it, it's been reported there's only a 40% chance of those that pay actually get their data unlocked. So they're just like, if unlike when you steal someone's child, you may and I don't know the odds there. Let me back up. It's akin to kidnapping. There's no guarantee you're going to get your data back. Worse, with ransomware, who knows what else they can do with their data? If they give it back to you, can't they resell it? I mean, when you're sitting there in that position, is it just as scary as it is in the movies, where you're at the hospital and all the screens go black and you can't get your patient files, and then God only knows what happens to those files, because then they're all over the dark web? Is that what we're saying? That the movies are, in actuality, the reality of it all?
Yeah, so it's a big problem, because you can lose your data twice, so to speak. So if you pay the ransom, they know you're good for another attack, and so companies have been hit multiple times because they know you'll pay up. The other problem is that they're not just locking files, unlocking them when you pay the ransom and walking away. They certainly got copies of all your information, so personal details of your customers, your employees, intellectual property, and that can be sold on the dark web or even the clear web. And so, there's double, triple, quadruple, ransomware attacks, and companies, again, they don't always get their money back. But I think the big message is, think about contacting the FBI, because we saw with Colonial Pipeline, for example, they got the FBI involved and were able to recoup some of that ransom that they paid out.
So as a company, as a real estate company, as investor, developer, lender, broker, we're sending contracts, we're moving deals around, tenant information, inventory, work orders, even, and not just that. We're today installing all of these devices. Is ransomware targeted specifically through computers? Does it also affect mobile? Does it affect my smart thermostat? I mean, how does it get in to your computer? Where's the entry point?
Sure. So with a lot of ransomware attacks, and with most types of malware, the point of entry is usually in an email, and there's a link that somebody clicks on. And if you're in a company, for example, with, I heard the head of the FAA one time say, what keeps me up at night is, more than 41,000 employees and worrying about whether they click on a link. And so a lot of this through a phishing link. And so that's why going through and doing these test phishing campaigns in your company periodically is really, really important. And when you mentioned before about kind of how impactful these are, I use this analogy. I know I've used it before, but when you think about a hospital in London that withstood World War II bombings, blitzkrieg, and continued operations and helping patients, that shut down with a ransomware attack. People on their way to surgery were stopped. Surgeries were stopped midway. And we know of at least one person who died as a result of this ransomware attack. So if we think about the real estate industry, how would you plan if all the computers in your company went down? We've seen it happen with Sony. We've seen it happen in Saudi Arabia with an energy company called Aramco. 30,000 computers were rendered useless after a cyber attack. This is the kind of planning you have to do today. If you're reduced to pen and paper, you have no access to your computers, what do you do? How do you continue your business? And having that business continuity plan is really, really important, and ransomware adds a new dimension to that.
Well, and it's not just ransomware, right? So there are man-in-the-middle attacks and opportunities where people are sitting in your networks, understand it. So let's go down the real estate example. The majority of our artisans, C-suite real estate all over the U.S. We are bidding on a project. Let's say we're sending financial information because we're trying to close out a transaction, closing on a big deal. Here's the closing paperwork. How does a man-in-the-middle attack work? What is that?
So a man-in-the-middle attack, for example, happens when somebody intercepts your communications. So, using Wi-Fi in a public space is one of those vulnerable areas where somebody can capture your login and password to a system. You're at Starbucks, for example. So that's a big problem. The big thing that is a real concern today that I talk about when I'm at these presentations is, third-party risk and fourth-party risk. And in the real estate industry, when you think about how many suppliers, third parties, fourth parties you're interacting with, you no longer have to be just concerned about your security and defenses. You have to think about your third parties. And so you interact with so many other vendors. What are their security policies, and validating those people? So, when you're vetting a new vendor and looking at their risk, you're talking also about IT risk. Tell me about the people who work in your IT security. Do you have blue team and red team exercises? How often do you have cybersecurity training? Does your company have any certifications in terms of cybersecurity, ISO, for example? And so these are questions that you need to ask, not just can they fulfill their promise with delivering something to you. We know now, especially with state-sponsored attacks, that third parties are a big target for the hackers, for the bad guys, because getting into one of these third-party providers gives them credentials and access to maybe hundreds of different companies, and one of yours could be one of those companies.
Absolutely. So I think back on our conversation in 2019, and I forgot what company it was. I remember. No, it was Waze, right? And it was incredibly intrusive, and it was all types of data. It's the same concept. Once you have something on your phone where you're using something, if that something can be a point of entry. So although email is the most highly used route of attack through those links, can I be texted a bad link? I can get it through text. I can get it through an in-app messaging. There are other hooks. Is that an accurate statement? To just give access to these bad actors.
Yeah, so there's Pegasus 1 and 2, and developed by NSO out of Israel, for example, that could be installed on people's phones. It was purchased by some governments. It was used to infiltrate investigative journalists on their phones. So it's really, really important to make sure that you keep your operating system, whether it's iPhone or Android, keep that operating system up to date, because they're more conscientious of these types of more sophisticated apps that run in stealth mode, meaning there's no icon. It's very difficult to identify that there's malware actually on your device. But also you got to think about apps that you're going to give certain permissions to. And so you've got to think about how, if you enable location services in a lot of these mobile applications, that it's very easy to track where somebody is throughout the day. And people use this to track, senior executives, C-suite, where they're going throughout the day based on Twitter, based on Instagram, based on other things that they're using. And also,
Best examples, photos, right?
Yes, yes. And the other thing is, when you connect with somebody using social media, it's easy for somebody to gather information about you as well. So we did some experimentation with dating apps, for example. Like Tinder is really, really popular with the next generation. And we can see that when you connect with somebody, meaning somebody swipes right on your profile and you've swiped right on their profile, there's an exchange of that information, and I can find out somebody's Spotify playlist. I can get access to their Instagram account that was marked private. I can get Facebook information. I can get a lot of third-party information. And so that reminds us that when you're logging in, don't use third-party login credentials. What I mean by that is, if you can log in to a website using your Google, your LinkedIn, your Facebook credentials, don't use those. Use the email address and the login and the password that you registered for that account with, because you're suddenly sharing more information with lots of different other social media services when you decide to log in with different credentials.
There was a statement you said to me years ago. The easier it is, the more trouble it can bring you when it comes to logging into tech or use of tech. And so now I've got a physical key, I've got a digital key. But you said two things there. You said the next generation. So one question I want to put a flag in is, I hear from the next generation all the time that I've got a VPN. I'm fine. I'm covered. I don't need to worry about anything. So let's put a flag on that one. And then the second thing I want to zero in on, what about Apple's, Apple's got this new security market, big marketing going out with, they're going to hide my email and forward that and log in through Apple. Is that the best way? Sounds like, because that's using your email but masking it in such a way, or no? Is that a trap for the future?
Yes, no. Apple is pretty good with security, and it definitely is good to hide your email when possible. They have developed more secure communications for you using, a VPN type service. VPNs are definitely more secure, better. But then you've got to remember that there's people who profile individuals, and when somebody's on social media and they're talking about a brand new car that daddy bought them, and where they're going for dinner, and it's very easy for somebody to quickly determine, hey, this person has money and they're a good target for me if I'm a hacker. And so that's really important to think about, is the social media is the greatest way to profile an individual.
And so when you say profile as an example, so let's run a use case. A hacker sees you standing in front of your new Porsche. Life is good. You're in Miami, and a hacker identifies you, or are the bots crawling the web, reading for these images, identifying targets. And then what happens? What happens next once they find a target?
Sure. Well, a big thing, first of all, is people rob your home while you're not there, and they work out where you are. And Zillow.com is a great way to identify, entry points and, other people in the area. You could use Google Street View to see a closer view of the neighborhood. Zillow tells you how much that house is worth approximately, whether it's worth robbing, basically, in the mind of the bad guy. And it's just very easy. I mean, you could pay $25 to $50 to get a full background check on somebody, run their credit report, see how many bank accounts they have, how much they have in assets. Unfortunately, in this day and age, it's easy to get that information.
Well, so let's flip the coin here. So the hacker's on Instagram. He knows I'm out to dinner because I'm posting on Instagram how great my life is with all these filters, and I'm not home. So now he's robbing my house. But isn't technology also? Haven't there been advances in technology for the police in that? Well, that criminal, that burglar's in my home, he probably brought a phone with him, or even a car. Anything newer than 2017 telematics, they know the cars are there. So what are some of those advancements? Because you scared everybody off the call already. They're shutting down their social media as we speak. What are some of the things that the police and the government or people like you are doing to help us once this happens?
Sure. So the reason I really got into forensics originally was because, actually, first of all, one of the misconceptions about digital forensics is that it's all cyber. It's related to computer crime, and that's not really what it's about. Because, as you mentioned, every crime, involves like a cell phone, and so a lot of, again, the reason I got into this was because this evidence is used, child abductions, child exploitation investigations. In fact, there's lots of law enforcement agencies where maybe 60% of their time is actually looking at child exploitation investigations. And so there are, the good thing about all of this information being out there is it's also great for catching the bad guy. And so the bad guy with their phone, they also have a car, as you mentioned, and that car, most cars today have a SIM card that has service provided by AT&T, and so that car is also pinging towers and giving a good idea of where that person is going or where they were. Even a lot of tires on vehicles today have an RFID chip, and they communicate with other vehicles, and so that's very, very useful. We have a number of states in the U.S. who are using digital license plates. California is one of those states, and this is rapidly changing. These digital license plates connect with your phone. They have a built-in modem, RFID tag, Bluetooth.
I'm sorry, what is the point of the digital license plate?
So the digital license plate helps law enforcement because when they stop you, they can quickly identify.
It's not something I would buy. It's just there. It's built into the license plate. You're saying now
it's a different type of license plate, yes, and it's digital. It's connected to your phone, and law enforcement can quickly determine if that person's driver's license that is handed over matches up with that license plate, and it's very easy to see if this is a stolen vehicle. So even with the new technology that we have today and the great advances in GPS, there's still thousands and thousands of cars that are, many of them going to West Africa today, many high-end cars, for example, that are being shipped out because first thing they'll do is rip out those GPS systems and they'll put them in a container and they'll be shipped off to places like Angola, for example. And so, the digital license plate is one of those features that may prevent this type of crime. Wow.
So that I had no clue that was something. What I found incredibly interesting was when if you've ever been pulled over, I've been told when the cop comes up behind you, he actually puts his thumb down on your trunk. You may have never noticed, but the purpose was he's leaving his DNA on your car. This is done on purpose. And someone told me, a police officer friend, said there are a bunch of these little things they do, but this is the future of that. The technology to track and do things in such a way that I should feel safer. But at what point is it more Big Brother? Because what you just said to me, between the cars, tires, license plate, and license, when am I not being tracked? When I'm in a Faraday bag over my head.
Sure. well, the first thing that they'll probably do is when they run that license plate, see if there's any wants or warrants. So is that person wanted, for example? But there's other technology that's been developed in policing, for example. Rather than speeding down the highway trying to chase this guy at 100 miles an hour, there's a dart that you could shoot now at a car, and that will have a GPS tracker. So I would say that, there's been, for example, stories about OnStar, and when you have OnStar and you're GM vehicle, even when you stop paying for the service, apparently they're
It's
still
still
tracking
going.
everywhere you go,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. But law enforcement are actually very confined to what they can search and what they can do. So if you're stopped by the police, they can't just ask for your phone and image that phone and get your information, right? They have to either have a warrant to search your car, or they see something that's in plain view. But also, there's very strict guidelines. There has to be probable cause for law enforcement to be able to get access to the inside of your vehicle or your car. There has to be a reason for this. There isn't any reason for Google and Facebook collecting a huge amount of data on you on a daily basis. And you don't have to have an iPhone to be tracked by Google, right? You're 90, probably 95+% of people have some kind of Google app on their iPhone that they're using to track you throughout the day.
Oh, my favorite is when you're talking with your spouse or in your home about a product, and then the next time you log into Amazon, what do you see? Suggested, discounted all the time. And so, I mean, they're always tracking. But you had said something to me, many years ago. If law enforcement can do it, so can a sophisticated criminal and a state-sponsored hacker. So, I mean, what's the likelihood for the different people out there, C-suite, everyday professors? I mean, what are the risk categories?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, like Intellis is one of those services where you can go on and you can request a report, background check on somebody, right? But you can also get lots of information from many other sources out there. So you just got to pay a little bit of money. There's Skippy, Spokio, Pipple. All these companies provide a lot of information, background information on people. The credit reporting agencies, they have their own services. You have TransUnion, for example, provide a lot of background information about individuals. Thomson Reuters, Clear, for example, Wooster, many other companies. Basically, it's very easy to determine right down to whether somebody is left-handed or right-handed. Do they have a pet? Do they not have a pet? Assets that they have under management, how many kids they have. And so this information, it's like the Wild West in the US, because, in other places, maybe like the European Union, for example, with GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, there's big limitations on what you can retain on an individual, what you can collect, for example, at the beginning, but what you can retain and how long you can retain that information. Now, states have been changing the laws. Unfortunately, in New York State, the state legislature did not approve a privacy bill, which would have helped a lot of consumers. A lot of people have been trying to emulate what California has with the California Consumer Privacy Act, for example, where there's limitations on the amount of information that you can collect. But it's really difficult. It's basically impossible to get privacy legislation passed at the federal level, because we know how good these companies are with lobbying on Congress, Capitol Hill, to make sure that privacy legislation doesn't get passed.
Well, and so you brought up an interesting point. What can we do as individuals to protect ourselves? What are our rights? So GDPR, you brought up. Overseas, we have a right to be forgotten, a right to delete our information. The consumer has all of these rights to stop being surveilled. Let's say it that way, almost surveilled. And here in the U.S., we're way behind. California, Washington has passed something. California, there are, I think, about 8 states. Last I read, making strides in this area. Something as simple as the double opt-in for email. You can't just reach out to me, scrape my information from the web. But what can we do, or what should people be doing on a day-to-day as they prepare for the future? The right to be forgotten may not be there, but what are some best practices as we go forward ahead of the privacy laws, because yes, regulation is coming, but regulation is slow. Let's be honest. And we're not going to move to Europe.
Sure.
Well, you might move to Europe. I know you like visiting the UK on occasion.
Yes, so there's lots of things you can do. First of all, know what information is out there about you. Like, go to a website like Have I Been Pawned, for example, PWNED, and see put in your email address, see what breaches you have been a part of. That's one of those things. Run your credit report, see if any of your information has been changed, because bad guys do that. It's especially problematic for kids, because a lot of juveniles, their social security number is being used for fraud. They only realize it when they go to apply for a college loan. Hey, my information has changed. Yeah. So we don't think about checking our children's credit report. Misinformation can be a good thing. Putting out information that's maybe not accurate about yourself to throw people off, like Andreas, the skydiver who goes to Malibu all the time, and just different things that muddy the waters a little bit about who you are. A lot of people are big fans of putting on LinkedIn the conferences that they're at and information about where they are. And that gives away information. People talk about projects that they work together on, especially in IT. That helps people understand what kind of systems you're running. People talk about problems that they're having with their network, types of systems. That gives away information about what you're using. Job openings, people put a lot of information out there about, experience needed in this type of software and this type of hardware. That tells the bad guy about what you've got running on your network. As I mentioned before, keeping your operating system updated, both your computer and your phones, keeping your apps updated as much as possible. Thinking about old-fashioned verification techniques, like actually picking up a phone and asking somebody, did you send this information to me? Please verify this. This is a really, really good thing. For those people out there, from a corporate perspective, an enterprise perspective, continually testing employees, sending out, phishing type experiments and that kind of thing is really, really important. But knowing really what information is out there about you, not having your location services on when possible, not connecting your phone and your contacts with too many things. I mean, I use Signal, for example, for more encrypted communications, but at the same time, I wouldn't let Signal or WhatsApp have access to my contacts. It is easy for a company to write a piece of code that would pull down all your contacts from that application. So try to limit the permissions that you give to all of these applications as well. That's another piece of advice that I would give.
That's really the biggest one, is limit surface area, limit the amount of exposure anything has, and the amount of connectivity it has with other things where possible. I mean, that's something you and I've talked about for years. So as these cyber criminals are becoming bolder and they're becoming, it's state sponsored. There's been a lot of talk, especially with what happened in Ukraine, and I want to touch on this prior to talking specifically about real estate development projects and the new tech they're putting into these buildings. What is digital warfare? I mean, we've heard about it. What is Russia doing in Ukraine digitally? What is that cyber tech? What does that digital warfare really mean? And what is the cascading effect here? Because the butterfly flaps its wings in Australia, there's a tornado in China, right? There is an effect, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. So we think that the war in Ukraine began less than a year ago, and that's really not the truth at all. I mean, it began a number of years ago, probably back in 2015, 2016, with a number of different attacks. One of those attacks that didn't really make headline news was Black Energy, which was a piece of malware that was used by the Russians to take down the power grid for about 700,000 Ukrainians. And so we've seen these types of attacks. So, for example, with the Russian incursion in Ossetia, Georgia, for example, we saw denial of service attacks against the president's website and against attacks against other ministers in government. And so a lot of these former Soviet countries continually suffer many of these attacks. I think that we also need to think about, political events and how they may impact us here in the U.S. So, being a supporter of Ukraine in this war, and other NATO countries, are more susceptible to cyber attacks from Russia. And one of the reasons is it's difficult, and this is a big, discussion in the U.S. government, is how big does a cyber attack have to get before you actually, make some kind of kinetic warfare, before you launch an actual attack. We know that these cyber attacks can take down, energy companies already, and if one of those attacks impacted the U.S., at what point would we actually launch a similar attack? We know, for example, when Sony was attacked by North Korea, there was an executive order that was issued to take down the electrical grid, the internet in North Korea. I think it was 24 hours and 1 second after that attack happened. And so we do have a lot of cyber capabilities. It's not like we're always on the defense, and that put North Korea on notice that, anything you can do, we can do better. But we've seen these cyber attacks state-sponsored more and more. Iran launched attacks on the banks and the banking system here in the US after they got cut off from SWIFT, which is the payment system, interbank payment system. And so a lot of these political events are also tied to cyber attacks on corporations.
So, and then bringing that full circle now to the micro level, here we are in commercial real estate. Logistically, how small an incursion or how small an event is an event that would need your services or would cause an audit? Is employee X at I want to say outpost, but that's the wrong term, at a branch office in Alaska, he gets hacked and he's got ransomware on his personal computer that he also brings to work. Is that enough of a red flag? When do you escalate, or when do you call in the big guns like yourself, co-detectives, or how do you report it?
Yeah, I think the big challenge is the false positives. We get a lot of alerts that are not really cyber attacks, and the other thing is that companies are hacked on a daily basis. I mean, Department of Homeland Security suffers millions of cyber attacks on a daily basis. And the big challenge for organizations is prioritizing those attacks. Okay. And the problem as well is that one attack can lead to more than a year of an investigation. Companies really don't know when they've been breached, and sometimes they're informed by the FBI or GCHQ, hey, we found your information on another server, you've been breached. And companies don't know when they've been breached. They don't know what information is being exfiltrated, taken out of the company, because they're very good about encrypting that information when they take your intellectual property out of your organization. So that's a big problem. Again, back to your point about escalating and prioritizing, that you definitely need to think about forensic people and not just at the last minute. Shop around, find out what services somebody can provide you, find out about their experience. And we often think about security people and protecting the systems, but we don't think about when something goes wrong, do we have some kind of agreement with a forensic firm that they will come in and this is their price for investigating this? because even the high-tech companies have those types of contracts. They don't have people waiting in case something goes wrong, in case they have a serious state-sponsored attack. They also have contracts in place with forensic firms to bring those people in, because they know something is going to happen. Everybody is going to be breached at some point or another. It's going to happen. But again, companies need to think about things such as, and I spoke to a friend of mine who works for a company, and basically what they do is they have a service where they email employees and they tell them, this is a report on you and all your information that's been compromised and is out there for sale on the web. And that's very impactful, rather than, from the top down saying, your personal information can be easily compromised. Make sure you change your passwords regularly. Make sure you have a different password for your personal accounts than you do for your work accounts. I think it's a pretty good idea when you have employees who are emailed directly and saying, here's your profile, this is what's been compromised, this is what's out there on the web about you. And suddenly people start to think about passwords differently, changing maybe their email addresses, that kind of thing. I would say, I don't know why it hasn't been a trend before. I don't see it as a trend, but corporations thinking about making email addresses difficult, just as difficult as passwords. Why can't we have some kind of mix of alphanumeric numbers rather than just first initial, last name, and somebody trying lots and lots of different combinations to get into that account?
Well, it's so, at least for commercial real estate, we've relied so heavily on email as an industry for years. And I have noticed probably 2 to 3 years ago, 1 year prior to COVID, COVID is such a brainwash, right? At conferences, if you meet someone, you get their email. But if you go to their website, all of a sudden there's no email on the website. It's a button. And they started to mask that email. They started to pull it off the web because they realized that, wait a minute, one, we're tired of being spammed. And two, maybe there's a security issue here. So giving out less information is better. So I couldn't agree more on that front.
But also masking your phone number as well. Having a Google Voice number, and then your most trusted people you give out your real number to. And I think Google Voice is a great way of doing that. But also, a lot of companies have invested heavily in threat intelligence.
Yep.
And that's a little bit different from security, because it's also kind of doing a temperature check on how people feel about your company. Are there any particular threats to your company? So, for example, pharmaceutical companies monitor, these PETA activists or whatever, animal rights activists and so forth, who have launched cyber attacks in the past. But also, you've got to think about, and I've seen this on LinkedIn so many times, people talking about first day on the job, I just got hired, and they're right there and they've got a picture of their ID, or they're holding up their ID and stuff. And that's a great thing for hackers to see out there. So having that threat intelligence component, it's a little bit different from traditional security, but lets you be able to see potential threats. And many people who used to work in the investigative world work in those kinds of areas.
So it's very much like the evolution of college recruiters, right? They now go in and they look at your Facebook. They'll go through your pictures. They'll make sure that you have a good moral fiber, I think is the term. So the same is true now at the company level. Companies need to investigate or go through their employees' digital footprint, you're saying, right? And have somebody do that and point things out, because there is a risk. And when we're talking commercial development, that hospital you mentioned, one person died. Commercial development today is all about smart buildings. It's about automatic doors, automatic lights, automatic heat. Shut the HVAC off. I mean, it's all relative, which is why I'm so glad you're on the show every month to bring it full center, because people need to understand that the invention of this made it all, and the interconnectivity of it all made it all relative. And I always love when you bring up the fact that, by the way, guys, they break into your house because, yes, your valuables are physical as well as digital, more digital in some cases. So as an ongoing trend, that's what you're seeing. You're seeing more companies masking information. Maybe we'll mask emails one day. I haven't. Well, I guess companies did mask phone numbers. You had the switchboard, right? Call into a switchboard instead of a direct line. That seems to be becoming more often the case in large companies once again, but not the email address. That's an interesting one. We'll have to wait and see. So with that being said, if there's one takeaway, and I know we've got the show coming up on the first Thursday of the month next week, 6 p.m. Eastern. Love to have you back with the group. What's the one big takeaway over the last year as everybody returns to work? And in today's world, you're all over the world. What's the big takeaway for our listeners?
Oh, there's so many big takeaways.
There's the problem.
Yeah, I really think that so for corporations, first of all, there is this move to include somebody with cybersecurity experience on your board of directors. There is some legislation out there, such as New York State Department of Financial Services Part 500, which basically says that your board of directors is also on the hook for reviewing and approving your cybersecurity planning. Right, so that's for the financial services. But I think there is going to be this continued trend on having somebody who knows about cybersecurity be able to review on your board of directors, review what you're actually doing. I cannot say enough about having a third party come in and review your network defenses, but also physical defenses. And I really think that this is often, how the term cybersecurity leads us astray, because we're thinking about everything in a cyber world, but we forget that there are just as many people being profiled by somebody. There is somebody behind this who targets individuals. The other thing as well is that these third parties who can do an evaluation on your company, they have a very different perspective on you. Cyber attacks are sometimes just like, your car parked at the train station, right? And the guy walking along and checking the doors to see which cars somebody forgot to lock, right? And this is the way that a lot of cyber intruders work as well. So think about those drive-bys or people walking around looking for your defenses, your vulnerabilities in defenses. And there's tools out there such as MX Toolbox, for example, where I can passively look at a website and see what vulnerabilities are being flagged about your company. I can look at LinkedIn, I can see, tech forums, I can look at job postings, very easily profile technologies that you're using on your network. And then there's websites I can do, like Exploit Database will tell me all the vulnerabilities associated with all of those systems that you're running in your company. So think about somebody who could do this kind of assessment and see how much they could profile about your company, your technology, and the people in your company.
Wow. And Code Detectives, your company do those assessments?
We do those. We work on post-breach, also investigations. Yeah, absolutely. Security. Yep.
So if they want to reach you, they can certainly reach you, and Mr. Mendoza's back there. He'll throw up your contact information for those that want it. There you are. They can send you an email. They can reach out to Code Detectives. Although we did not obfuscate that email.
That's okay. I trust you.
Okay. And we trust our listeners too.
Yeah.
That all being said, I want to thank you. This was incredibly insightful. I know we don't get a lot of a big opportunity to talk deeply about tech and intrusions and the world of it, but it's all interconnected, and that's what the show's about. To our listeners, don't forget to tune in first Thursday of every month, Thursday, 6 p.m., anywhere you get your audio and everywhere you get your social media live, 6 p.m. next Thursday. You can even ask that Alexa device that's listening to all your shopping needs for the CRECo.ai Roundtable, and you can tune in that way. Dr. Darren Hayes, I want to thank you for all the expertise you bring to the table and everything you do for the industry. I mean, you're literally on the forefront of so many big things that most people think don't happen. And I was one of them when I got hacked years ago. And you gave me a sanity check and you said, no, it's okay. This is what we're going to do. So the takeaway is get somebody in your organization, get a Darren Hayes, if you can find one like him, because there's only one like him, working, and tune into the CRECo.ai Roundtable next week. Thank you all. Mr. Mendoza, if you'd lead us out.